Yeah. So let's see who's coming in. Attendees.
Hi, Anne. Hello. Are you joining us?
You're muted at the moment, Andrew.
Howard, that was Anne.
Yeah.
She's trying to get in. Could you send her the link again, please?
John?
Yeah, I'll do that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good morning, everyone. Our guest speaker is struggling to join us. That was her on the telephone now. So we're just resending the link to Anne. She should be with us any moment now. So forgive a slight delay, ladies and gentlemen. What it does mean is that the others that we're expecting have got time to come in. It's not quite 12 o'clock yet, so just bear with us. Thank you. Any joy, John?
I've certainly sent it to her.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We've got people coming in all the time, so we'll just obviously just wait for Anne. See if I've got any messages. So while we're waiting for Anne, I think I'll maybe, Howard, just do my few words that I normally say. Suffice to say that this is now one of our regular Tuesday and Friday webinars brought to you by the Structural Timber Association, by the Housing Forum, and by Constructing Excellence in the Southwest, the Midlands, Wales and the Northeast. Any moment now, we're going to be joined by Anne Bentley of Ryder Levitt Bucknell and the Construction Leadership Council. She's been leading some work on behalf of the CLC on value and centres around procurement, which is of course what we're going to be talking about today. We all know that procurement tends to dictate behaviours and culture through any business or through any supply chain or any project. So the way we procure is incredibly important. And certainly post COVID-19, I think there's an opportunity for all of us to ensure that the way we procure products and services is in line with the Constructing Excellence best practice requirements. So I believe Anne's just joined us. Is that you, Anne?
It is, yes.
Hello, Anne. How are you?
I'm all right. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I've been clicking on all the wrong links. So
okay, it's good to see you. I know you have a very busy diary, so I'm sure, like me, you've come out of another meeting straight into this one. I'm back-to-back Zoom meetings today. Got no-
Yeah, it's strange because you would have thought that you would have had more time when you're working from
Oh,
home,
no.
but I'm not entirely sure that's true.
Although the problem is now, you see, we've got no time in between to drive anywhere.
No, that's right. Just a sec, I'm just going to close the door because the dog's just come in, and so open
Okay,
the door.
okay.
Just a second.
Okay. So delighted that Anne's now with us. I'm sure you're going to find the next 55 minutes really useful.
There we go.
Anne, have you got a screen to share with us, or?
Right, I will attempt to do that. So hang on. Let me just come out of this a second.
Okay. So I was just explaining to our viewers that you know, procurement is key in terms of driving culture, behaviours, and so on. There's a real opportunity here post-COVID to make sure that we you know, we deliver the best practice that we've been looking for many years, haven't we?
Indeed, indeed. Actually, I've been doing quite a bit of work on this recently, and the number of sort of dare I say false starts that we seem to have had. Okay, can you see that?
We can. So, Howard, do you want to say any house rules before Anne kicks in?
Oh, sorry, that shouldn't.
That's all right. Don't worry. No, that's all right.
No, go on.
Howard, would you like just give the house rules and then Anne can start?
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that. I think most people have been here before. So for those of you who haven't, welcome. If you'd like to share who you are and where you're from, that would be great. You can do that via the chat menu. For questions, you can type these in on the Q&A menu. If you'd like to own them, that's great, rather than just being anonymous. And if we can, we will bring you in. And we may use later on the hands button that you'll also find on your Zoom menu. I think that's all I need to say. So welcome to Anne. So over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone, for inviting me to speak. I was sort of asked to speak on a number of topics, and I guess I'm probably going to concentrate on some of them a little bit more than others, actually. So what I'll do, a little bit of background to the CLC, but actually I think most of you know this. You know, the fact of the matter is that for the last 20 years, as Andrew said, people have been talking about the sort of poor performance of the construction industry and what could or should be done to improve that. And the CLC is one of probably many organisations that have been formed to try and address some of these issues. The CLC is perhaps a little bit different in as much as it's a sort of joint group. It's co-chaired by the Construction Minister, which is currently Nadeem Zahawi, and Andy Mitchell, who's the Chief Executive of Thames Tideway. And so it is a sort of, you know, an industry stroke government group. It's sponsored by BAYS. And the CLC's ultimate aim remains what the government construction strategy is, i.e. to reduce emissions, to reduce costs, to improve delivery, speed of delivery, and indeed to grow exports. I mean, that's always been something that's been lurking in the background, but perhaps has come to the fore a little bit more. And sort of the way that the CLC has worked is by having some fundamental themes, so these themes of digital, manufacturing and performance, but also having a number of working groups, so procuring for value, people and skills, building safety, etc., that have been really tasked with making recommendations and improvements in these key areas. It's fair to say that since, you know, we were struck with coronavirus, the focus of the CLC has changed somewhat. I hope temporarily changed, if I'm honest, but it became very evident very, very early on in the crisis that in order to have any level of discussion at all with government, there needed to be a sort of single industry grouping, if you like, that not exactly a representative group, but a group that could convene industry fairly quickly and so present government with a single voice. Because whilst, of course, all of us think that construction is the most important thing that we ever deal with, of course, from a ministerial level, it's fair to say that health was the most important thing that they were dealing with. And whilst the economy and the impact on different industry groups was important, it took a secondary role. You know, there's no two ways about that. And so government made it very, very clear that for each sector, so be that construction, you know, automotive, aerospace, they really only wanted to deal with one group of people. And so the Construction Leadership Council convened a much, much wider group. So the first thing that we did was sort of widen the industry engagement, if you like. And I know certainly Andrew's been on some of the regular calls, you know, so bodies like Constructing Excellence, many trade associations, professional associations, etc., have been on these regular calls that have been convened by the CLC just to make sure that information is flowing. And it's fair to say, actually, and credit where credit's due, Nadine Zahawi, the construction minister, has been very active on these calls as well. But it wasn't just a matter of communication and industry engagement. It was actually a matter of doing stuff that was really important during the early days, should I say, of the crisis. And so the CLC then split off into a number of working groups, and it's fair to say these working groups put in an enormous amount of effort and produced all sorts of guidance, documentation, best practice, etc. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the site operating procedures that were produced that really actually enabled construction to get back to work pretty quickly after the 23rd of March sort of lockdown, if you like. But a lot of other things were produced as well. So the talent retention scheme, which if you haven't heard of, I mean, is actually going to be formally launched this week, is a way of recognising that construction will have a downturn and that, you know, sadly people might be made redundant. And this is a scheme to actually try and protect jobs, to swap jobs between different employers and to advertise vacancies and staff if sadly people are made redundant. We also did a lot of work on contracts and disputes. This is an area that I've been quite closely involved with. And the sort of premise there was that not only is coronavirus going to have an immediate impact on construction, which of course we've seen in site, you know, as sites had to close and productivity fell, but actually there's going to be a long-term impact on construction. And I don't mean the whole industry, I mean construction sites and the construction process. And that, you know, disputes are inevitably going to occur. And so a huge amount of work was done in terms of putting guidance together to minimise disputes, to recommend sort of collaborative forms of addressing disputes, and really trying to put a bit of common sense behind the way that both clients and contractors are dealing with potential issues on site. Other things that the CLC has been looking at over, again, the last 3 or 4 months really, was surety and trade credit insurance. And in fact, documents have been issued on both of those. So, you know, helping people to get bonds, making sure that there's insurance in place so that actually the supply chain can keep working. We're still working on product availability, and every week data has been published as to where products are and aren't available. And in fact, today, sadly, I couldn't get it onto the slide, we've also published guidance on cost planning, specifically cost planning in terms of on future contracts, how possible spikes in coronavirus, how the impact of coronavirus can be incorporated in contracts in a fair and reasonable way so that both clients and contractors have some level of protection. Of course, the biggest area that the CLC has been engaged with, and I'll come on to this in more detail in a moment, has been not just the immediate reaction to coronavirus, but also putting forward a roadmap of how we actually might use this crisis to actually improve the industry in the long term. Sort of putting that to one side for a moment and to try and give you some context of the work that I was doing long before coronavirus hit us, I've been involved with the CLC specifically in a project called Procuring for Value. And Procuring for Value really sort of got some traction back in 2018 when the government produced its industrial strategy construction sector deal. And one of the parts of the sector deal was to embed the Procure for Value approach in public procurement and actually put some, I guess, some money where their mouth was. And so not just saying that it should be embedded, but actually saying it will be embedded through the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. But the government did throw down a challenge at this time to say that it was all very well asking government to embed this as a sort of as a way forward, but industry had to step up to the mark, and industry had to define what it meant by value and also produce a methodology for procuring with value, if you like. And so in parallel to the sector deal, the CLC also wrote a report that I have spoken about, some of you have known many times before, about how we could actually do this, how we could really incorporate procuring for value into general construction procurement. And the object of this report was really, really simple. It was to actually give clients the best possible chance of hitting this sort of sweet point between what they need to do or what they desire to do, what it's feasible to do, and what it's actually viable to do. And the sort of theory, I guess, that we put forward is that in order to do this, there will almost certainly be a number of choices, but there may well also be a number of trade-offs. And so what we wanted to create was a sort of framework where those trade-offs and choices could be evaluated and prioritised, and meaningful choices could be made, rather than simply, you know, he who shouts loudest gets most, which sadly I think is sometimes the case in procurement practices at the moment. So why I sort of touched on that was that part of the roadmap to recovery actually brings some of this work together, and it was actually really quite pleasing to see that part of the roadmap to recovery includes this sort of building back better. And so the roadmap, again, some of you might already be familiar with this, the roadmap for recovery that, as I said, the CLC have produced, but actually it's being supported by BASE. So it's not just a CLC document, it's got more depth than that. And that very much sees industry recovery in these three phases. The restart, i.e. much of the work that the CLC has been doing over the last 4 months. What do we have to do to get the industry up and running? Reset is actually, is there a better way of doing it? And should we use this crisis to actually reset some of the standards? And then reinvent, where should we take the industry next? So this is very much building on Andrew's point that, you know, we've been forced down this route through something terrible, but perhaps something good could come out of it in the end. Now, a lot of thought went into this from BASE, not just in terms of the three elements, but actually how would be the best way to develop this plan that went across the entire construction sector. I think a really big criticism of many construction initiatives over the years is that they've only applied to certain parts of the industry. So they might only have applied to infrastructure, or they might have only applied to housing, or they only apply to the private sector. And so a huge amount of thought went into saying, well, how do we best ensure that whatever these sort of developments or improvements that we're proposing, you know, wherever they come from, how do we then ensure that they actually get delivered across the whole of the construction industry? And so these four broad sort of sectors, I guess, so economic infrastructure, that's not just roads, railways, etc. It also includes schools, hospitals, etc. Housing, which is pretty obvious. The sort of poor relation that often gets missed out of these, the domestic, you know, renewals, maintenance and improvement. I mean, that actually represents 40% of construction industry expenditure. And then, you know, local, social and commercial construction, look, you know, the sort of built environment, as many of us would say. So really there's sort of 3 areas of focus and 4 sectors, and then developing a plan. And the plan is quite detailed, and it is available on the CLC website if you want to look at it. But essentially, each sort of phase has 3 key themes. It's fair to say that the most of the restart phase has now been delivered. So getting projects back on site was the site operating procedures. Maximising the employment is the talent retention scheme, and minimising disruption due to commercial contractual disputes. That was the works done by the contract group and the cost management group. So all of this actually, as of today, has now been published. So it's probably fair to say that we have now moved into the reset phase. And so the reset phase, again, some of this has already been implemented. So demand pipeline, or demand and pipeline, well, the IPA has published the public sector pipeline, and I think, I can't remember how many billion, but some tens of billions of future public sector procurement has been published. That was published about 3 weeks ago. Productivity, this is something that the IPA, the Infrastructure and Projects Association, are really looking very, very closely at, in terms of, you know, can we finally close that productivity gap? And professionalism, very interesting. One of the things that the IPA have said is that we can only improve productivity if we actually make significant investment in training, in collaborative working, in new business models, in fairer contracts, and in different payment mechanisms. So the IPA have really recognised that, you know, productivity isn't an entity within itself, but actually it needs massive changes to the way that clients and their advisors, and indeed constructors, everybody in the supply chain behaves. The final phase of the plan, and it's probably in truth the phase that I'm the most excited about, is really, you know, how can we use this crisis to change the industry? And, you know, transformation, how can we actually sustain economic growth via construction, not just general economic growth? How can we build stronger partnerships within the construction sector? But very specifically, again, from my point of view, and I guess from your group's point of view, you know, we must adopt procurement models that actually improve value in the construction industry, and most specifically improve value across the whole life of construction assets, not just lower cost, you know, because there's still massive confusion between value and cost. So that then very much sings to the tune, if you like, of the work that I started with the CLC, but has actually now been taken over by the Construction Innovation Hub. The Construction Innovation Hub was set up on the back of the construction sector deal, and has got substantial funding. It's got funding running to something like £70 million. So it's not, you know, a fly-by-night organisation. It's something that government, again, have put their money where their mouth is and said, if we actually want to change construction for the better, we need this centralised innovation group that's not necessarily doing all the work, but is certainly, I guess, coordinating it, collating it, bringing it to one place, testing it, publishing it, and actually making sure that it works. And that sort of, I guess, brings me to really the most important thing from my point of view, which was that last Thursday we actually launched, we being the CLC and the Construction Innovation Hub, launched this toolkit, the Value Toolkit. And this really is, I guess, the next phase in the Procuring for Value journey. What this is not just a report, it's much more than a report. It's actually a report that's backed by a piece of software. It's backed by a huge amount of research from the building research establishment. And what it will give clients is not just opinion, it will actually give them tested metrics and ways of using those metrics to actually determine A, what their priorities for value are, which most clients actually find is a really difficult thing to do. But B, when they've determined what those priorities are, it will then give them benchmark data that they can refer to, and their advisors and constructors can refer to during particularly the optioneering phase of a project, then through the design phase of a project, through the construction phase of the project, into the actual occupation of the project, and we'll give a feedback loop, particularly for public sector clients, as to what actually worked, what actually delivered value, and then continue to improve value in future projects. So it's quite opportune that this presentation was today. I mean, I didn't choose the date of the presentation, but had it have been any earlier, I wouldn't have actually been able to sort of tell you about the launch of the toolkit. Again, the toolkit is on both the CLC's website and it's on the CIH's website. And I would strongly recommend that if anybody is interested, you do take a look at it, because I think it really moves this forward. And what it effectively does, and I won't go into any detail because I could spend hours talking about this, but it gives clients a very, very simple mechanism to weight their priorities, to define their priorities in a way that starts off very simply. So it's looking at the 5 capital models, and it's saying, all clients will have financial priorities. Everybody knows that, but actually most clients will also have priorities in social value, in natural value, in human capital, etc. And so it gives this mathematical and benchmarked way of putting data into a model, which then actually gives clients the ability to really, I guess, test the dynamics of their model and see how sort of investment in one area might actually adversely or positively affect investment in other areas. So, I'm delighted to be able to tell you that we have made some progress, that the model is now being developed. And, again, I'm happy to take questions, but I would also ask for your sort of support in terms of taking this forward as well. So back to you, I think, Howard and Andrew. That really culminates my presentation.
Thank you very much, Anne. Inspirational as always. I always love listening to what you have to say. What I think we ought to do, Howard, now is maybe open it up to the floor to get a bit of chat going, see if there's any questions.
Good idea.
Yeah. So who'd like to be first? Raise your hand, put something in the chat box.
We've got Elizabeth Kavanagh here, so I'll...
Okay, let's start with Elizabeth. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll bring her in.
Okay. Elizabeth is a very active supporter in the Southwest for constructive access.
Okay, Elizabeth, you should now... you'll need to open up either just your microphone or ideally both your microphone and camera, and you'll be able to speak. So over to you, Elizabeth. Thanks.
Hi there. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hello there. I'm just really interested in what you said about looking at collaborative procurement models. It's something that myself, John Savage and Andrew Carpenter have been speaking about previously. So I wondered if you might be able to tell us a bit more about that.
Sorry, about collaborative procurement?
Collaborative business models. And
collaborative business models, okay. So the sort of premise that we've come up with in terms of developing the toolkit is not so much about collaborative business models per se, actually. It's more about making sure that at the absolute outset of the business casing, that the client takes into account the full range of issues that they're actually trying to address. Now, that might sound really stupid, because you think, well, why on earth would a client build something if they weren't taking into account the full range of issues that they wanted to address? But what our research has told us is that, in our opinion, and I mean, I accept that this is our opinion, solutions tend to have a sort of mismatch between what the original business case was and what happens during the sort of procurement process. So And what we're trying to promote is this language of outcomes. So instead of a client saying, you know, I need a 10,000 square metre school, we would rather they said, I need a facility to educate 500 children. Because that completely changes the sort of, I guess, the nature of what you're trying to procure, really, because suddenly what you then allow is the collaboration, because you allow alternative solutions to be put forward. You allow actually, you don't allow, you ensure that the benchmark that you're being measured against is the real benchmark, and not some sort of benchmark that has been created because it's easy. And the benchmark that I think that is created because it's easy tends to be the cost benchmark. So again, taking that example, I don't even know if school would be 10,000 square metres actually, so please QSs in the room, don't tell me that's the wrong size. But anyway,
I want to focus on learning outcomes.
So you know, immediately people start going, oh well, it should then cost £1,643 per square metre or something, and you immediately get into this benchmarking, rather than actually, wouldn't a better benchmark be if it improved the learning outputs of the children? So what we're trying to do is really get clients to think about the outcomes they're trying to deliver, rather than too quickly get into the specification, because we feel that as soon as you get into the detailed specification, you've sort of lost the plot to some extent. You need to get into specification eventually. We're just trying to say you shouldn't get there too soon. And it is therefore self-evident that collaborative business models actually promote that better than non-collaborative ones do. Early contractor engagement, much wider engagement with the whole team, you know, promoting sort of different options at this early stage is the way to get the best solution. And there's this huge body of evidence to demonstrate that as well. I mean, very little of what we've put forward is new. In fact, a lot of it's building on sort of Latham and Egan. It's going back 25 years.
And actually, sorry, Elizabeth, I cut you off. Carry on. Sorry. Go on, Elizabeth. Sorry.
I was just wondering, and I think it's a really nice point that you make about outcomes and the value of anchoring us all on the outcomes. Does the toolkit do anything in terms of focusing us on evidence and data?
Yes. Oh, it's absolutely massive on that. So one of the things that took us a long time was to come up with metrics that, in the words of our legal advisor, were challengeable. Because what we didn't want was some sort of philosophical or esoteric model that people went, well, that's very nice, but I couldn't procure anything on the basis of that, because as soon as I go out to market, people are going to say it's got no substance and we'll just go back to cost. And so using the 5 capitals model, we've subdivided the capitals into things that all of which have got really hard metrics. So, you know, obvious ones in finance are, you know, how much does it come, what's the cost per metre? But you've also got things like air quality. Well, that's measurable. That's absolutely measurable. There's no argument about what air quality is. You've got things like tons of carbon created, absolutely measurable. You know, you've got number of jobs created, but not necessarily just the number of jobs created during the construction process. I'm actually, in terms of social value, much more interested in the thing that you're building itself. Like, does the thing actually have any value? And so all of these metrics have absolute metrics that are beyond challenge. I mean, there's so much data behind them, but B, also benchmarks. So it's not just saying we want good air quality, it's that good air quality is, you know, this is the current benchmark that the Environment Agency uses, for example, so we would expect you to at least achieve that. And suddenly what you can do really quickly by using just 20 metrics is saying, crikey, well, actually, that is what good should look like. That's not even telling you about the performance of the children's education or anything. This is just about basic building. And yet, again, our research sort of told us that very few clients would look at even those 20 metrics. They'd look at 4 or 5. And then that's how they'd make many of their decisions. But 20 is not a huge number. I mean, it doesn't take long to look at 20 metrics to actually start getting some benchmark data together.
And the point I was going to make before I interrupted Elizabeth, for which I apologise, was that actually a lot of the points you're making, you say, you know, we've been looking at evidence for 20, 25 years. And I know going back to my CE days in the mid-noughties, we were looking at schools that delivered better education and hospitals that made patients better quicker. And I know that somewhere in the cellars of CE, there are some case studies.
No, there are, and actually there's some tremendously good case studies that CABE did, and they've got a lot of figures behind them in terms of, you know, health. It's interesting because health is probably the one sector that's built on this the best. So health do recognise that health outcomes are improved by better buildings. I would say they are streets ahead of other sectors, actually. But the evidence is there. I mean, there's even evidence that people feel better if they walk past a beautiful building.
Yeah, I mean,
now,
if I put my timber frame hat on, which I wear 4 days out of 5 in a week, we have similar evidence that, you know, people like to see, touch, feel timber. For health and well-being. So yeah,
exactly.
And I wonder if I could ask Martin Jones to come into the frame. Martin has been heading our procurement team in CE Southwest for the last 7 years, and I'd like him to come in onto screen if he would, not just to ask the question he's put in the Q&A box, which is what is the name of your dog, but maybe also to just comment on what he's heard. Martin, are you there?
Martin, I've opened up your camera and your microphones, so please come in.
Martin is now vice chair of our procurement group, but he has been chair for 7 years, and he's been driving the best practice procurement agenda within CE Southwest for time. Are you there, Martin? Not being shy today, surely.
He's got his camera on now.
Right.
Sorry, Alan, I thought you were leaving.
There you go.
No, I was trying to find the dog, but I couldn't get the camera on. So.
What's the name of the dog anyway?
Millie.
Millie. Very nice. Yeah, we've been doing an awful lot of work on procurement down here for I forget how many years really, but I guess it started mainly when back about 5 years ago, we produced a guide called Outcome-Led Procurement, a guide to common sense procurement in construction. And that focused very much on the front end of projects, in asking clients to be much clearer about what constituted value to them. But we also focused quite a lot on risk as well, because we felt that this was something that was often neglected at the front end of projects and came back to bite people later on in the project when the risk became more apparent. So I'm delighted to just to carry on that story forward. We did attempt an early attempt at a tool to come up with metrics to quantify value. And we developed a whole set of questions within a spreadsheet and so on that we hoped would guide clients towards asking the right questions about the project that they were planning. And then the idea was that we would then use those metrics to shape the delivery method. And so in the Southwest, we use something which we call our 4-box procurement positioning tool. And the answers to the questions would direct you into one of the 4 quadrants of this positioning tool, and then on into specific procurement approaches. But that's where we found the real difficulty, really, I think, was linking the statements of value from the metrics from the client's questionnaire into a delivery, in choosing the most appropriate delivery method. So maybe you'd like to expand a little bit about that in terms of the tool? So
if you have the chance to look at the toolkit document that CIH had published, they recognise this as being, I mean, they recognise 4 or 5 key themes actually. One is the definition of value itself, which I think it's probably fair to say.
Incidentally, can I just say, I think we're much more in favour of the term outcomes and steering around value, really, because it is so subjective, isn't it? Whereas
well, we don't. Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, to be honest, this is called the Value Toolkit, so it's not going to change its name now to the Outcome Toolkit. But nonetheless, what I was going to say is it looks at 4 or 5 key areas actually. So one is actually defining outcomes or value, however you want to look at it, and that in itself is complex enough. And I think it's actually fair to say that, I mean, you're right, that there have been quite a few attempts in the past. I honestly think that without the advent of current digital technologies, this would all sort of always end up a little bit unsatisfactory, if you know what I mean, because there's some fabulous work being done, but it's mainly been done on Excel spreadsheets on individual laptops. And what digital has allowed us to do is to move this to a proper database that will actually be managed by somebody, and that is a huge, so we're probably using identical techniques to what have been used in the past. It's just that we have a better digital platform to do it on now. So, and the fact that, of course, that's been funded, I mean, that work alone has cost some money just to set that up, which without the CIH's support, that never could have happened, because, you know, individual businesses wouldn't have done that. But that's only, if you like, a fifth of it. There's then a really significant part, which is exactly the part you're talking about, is the commercial models, the risk management, etc. And there's a whole exercise being done in that area that's being led by the ACE, the Association for Consulting and Engineering. And again, this is a funded piece of work. So they're looking at different contracts, different commercial models, etc. So that in itself, and that hasn't yet been published. I mean, that's ongoing work at the moment. There's then a piece of work being done about industry engagement, because there's absolutely no point in doing all this if industry doesn't know anything about it. Now, interestingly, that's actually being led by Constructing Excellence. So that's a paid-for project that Constructing Excellence through, if you like, headquarters, so Alison Nichol, that's being done at the moment. And again, she's just bringing her team together, but again, being paid for by government. So, you know, that's a great thing for CE to be involved in.
She's been in touch with all the regional directors.
Has she? Yeah, brilliant. So you'll obviously be able to feed into that one. There's then a piece of work being done about training, because again, something that, and this goes right back to Egan and Latham, both of their reports say that unless you actually train people in new ways of working, then actually there's not a hope in hell of them ever being able to do them. Sorry, I'm paraphrasing, that's not actually the words they used. And so there's a training group being set up that's being headed up by CECA, the Civil Engineering Contractors Association, as it happens, but only again because they've got quite a big training wing. So it's not that they're going to do all the training, it's that they have quite a good understanding of training and development, but again, a wide group. And then the final group is a client group. Now, this is a really interesting one, because this is actually being led by the IPA, which of course is the government department. And so this probably gives us more confidence than anything of certainly previous 10, 15 years, that, you know, government again are putting some resources behind this, and government departments are being brought in to look at the trial projects, how this could be moved forward. So IPA, who chair the Government Construction Board, so actually all the major procuring departments in government are represented there, but they're also bringing in private sector clients as well. So that sort of 5-strand approach, which is the toolkit, goes into a little bit of detail, but not very much detail over it. You know, over the next 6 months or so, we feel that that gives us a fairly good chance of success, actually, because we're not just saying to everybody, oh, we've done this piece of work, now use it. We're going, this has got real research behind it, and it's got an implementation plan, a training plan, and it's got industry and client engagement with it. So, you know, fingers crossed.
Thank you, Martin. Steve Green has a question, Howard. I wonder if we could bring Steve Green into play, please. Steve, are you there? You got your camera on, Steve, and your microphone? If you're not in your pajamas. Steve is a member of CE Midlands, Anne.
I've promoted him, so just take a moment to come through, I think.
Yeah, Steve heads our quality and compliance theme group.
Okay.
Hello, Steve.
Right, I'm here.
Hi, Steve.
Hi. Thank you, Anne. I always love listening to Anne. She just talks common sense, doesn't she? It's fantastic. It's, many other people think, have you ever worked in construction? Two questions, and interesting to see the support of the government behind the Value Toolkit. The obvious question is, will they be using it themselves? and at this particular time, with all these supposedly shovel-ready schemes, have you got time to implement it if the scheme's shovel-ready?
They're two very good questions, neither of which I can answer on behalf of the government, so I can't give you an opinion.
What a cop-out.
The first one, will it be used by government departments? I mean, so Huda Assad is the IPA assistant director who's leading the government side of this. I mean, she's always cautious, actually, because she always said that there's a sort of principle, apparently, that I've only learned fairly recently of democratic government, that you have to have sort of certain amounts of devolved powers. Now, we could go on to this and say, I'm not sure Dominic Cummings understands that. Sorry, that's a personal opinion. But basically, departments are supposed to have certain levels of independence so that you never get a single sort of protocol, if you like, taking over everything. And that was explained to me much better than that by a civil servant who said you will always have certain degrees of departmental autonomy, but they always have to work within an overall, legislative framework. So Huda's always slightly reticent of committing any individual department to taking this forward because they do have that level of autonomy. However, what is really important is we've got the Department for Transport and the Department for Education who are already working on trial projects. And so there is a real level of interest from those two. And why they're particularly important ones is they both do lots of repetitive projects, and it's repetitive projects that are likely to get the greatest value from actually assessing whether or not it worked or not, or feeding it back into the beginning. So there is a real level of interest from both of those departments, and Huda is certainly promoting it with the Government Construction Board. On the shovel-ready ones, I've almost taken the view that some of these things will probably not happen. I mean, sorry, not that the projects won't happen, that almost you can't have everything. And if you really do want, if you want a shovel-ready project to be built next week, you're not going to spend 6 months doing a reappraisal of it, are you? I mean, let's face it. So let's almost not pretend, and let's say, well, I mean, and we are certainly talking in the industry recovery plan about the next 12 months. So we're not really talking about next week. We're talking about things that are going to happen a little bit further down the line. That said, though, it is fair to say that if you talk to any ministers, they are all horribly aware of the lack of money that government has. And the sort of, there are a few catchphrases that, things like the levelling up agenda and that sort of thing, where, again, and I won't quote the civil servant because he'd probably be sacked, but a civil servant did say to me that certainly added social value or added economic value in former Labour seats that have now got a Conservative MP will probably actually push some of those projects further up the priority list than perhaps they historically were.
All right, Steve.
Could I ask just one other? I've got the guide up on the screen, and obviously I haven't had time to comprehend the whole thing, but it looks like there's a design quality aspect that then triggers a pass or fail. How does design come into this?
So I mean, yes, there is quite a lot of complexity in this, and what we've tried to do is simplify it, but there's a point beyond which you can't simplify it. So one of the significant groups that contributed to the development of the tool right from the very early stages was the CIC, so the Construction Industry Council, and one of the sort of toolkits, really, I guess, that they developed many years ago now was the thing called the Design Quality Indicators, which again are actually quite widely used in the health sector but have fallen by the wayside. But again, really, because they've become out of date. It's not that the philosophy is out of date, it's that the actual toolkit looks so cumbersome now that people just wouldn't want to use it. But the principle behind DQI, which is that, you know, how do you know if your design has worked if you're not using some method of assessing it, is still actually completely current. And so that sort of philosophy that design is an absolutely fundamental part of the delivery of value is completely built into the tool. And again, it's got a number of gateways, or how do you assess the design against your original business case? How do you continue to assess the design if the business case changes, or when you've set your priorities? And again, this was a gap we really identified. We actually felt that most business cases were fairly well written. It's not that clients don't know what they want, it's that it gets lost in translation. And dare I say, given that it's what Bridle-Levitt Bucknell does, it often gets lost in translation when a quantity surveyor gets hold of it. Well, because they are driven by cost. Well, no, I said this to all of my colleagues as well. The QS is often appointed to do the wrong thing. The QS is often appointed to reduce costs, not to improve value. And if that's what we've been appointed to do, that's what we'll do. So tying together the business case, the design, the procurement actually should be a role where the QS gets elevated rather than denigrated.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Anne. Are there any more questions, ladies and gents? I'm just looking at my Q&A box, Howard. There doesn't appear to be anything in there. Can you see anything that I'm missing?
Yeah, could I lob a grenade in? Would that be all right?
Of course.
This is a very high-level document, if I could sort of perceive it from the weeds perspective. It's interesting that 15% has been allocated to the human aspects. But when we look at the 4 areas, there's absolutely nothing in there about behaviour, trust or anything, which really is the glue that will hold all of this together. What would you like to say on that? I mean, are they aware at this top level of anything like that?
So, well, I'd say two quite different things. I mean, the 15% is that just happens to be a picture. I mean, you could allocate 100% to it if you wanted. These are sliders. I mean, basically, a project can only ever add up to 100% of value. And what we're actually trying to do in the model is to get people to allocate at least something to these areas, because our premise is that historically, at least 80% has been allocated to cost, and then cost has driven the entire agenda. So in terms of that, then human is one of the 5 capitals. But the capitals, again, are actual things that can be measured, things that can be traded, whereas I would argue that behaviours is actually a different thing. So a behaviour is something that I think should come through the commercial, the risk, the contractual side of it. It's something that is required to deliver a project, but it's not actually one of the capitals that the project will deliver, because this is about what the project will deliver when it's finished, not how you deliver it. So it's actually an assessment of the outcomes, not the inputs. And I would say behaviour is one of the inputs in order to deliver the outcomes. So it's not saying it's not important, it's just measuring a different thing.
Okay, Howard?
I think we could debate that for a fair while.
I think what we ought to do, Howard, perhaps, is maybe take this opportunity. That there are no other questions. So I think we ought to take this opportunity to thank Anne for giving up so much of her valuable time. And as Steve said, we always love listening to what you have to say, Anne. It's always inspiring. So thank you for what you're doing, Jen.
No, it's a pleasure.
And thank you for what you've done for us in the last hour or so. So thank you. So thank you to you. Thank you to Howard and John for hosting. We're having 3 more webinars this Friday and 2 next week on Tuesday and Friday. Then we're going to take August off, ladies and gents. We think we deserve a break. We're webinared out, I think, by the end of July. So, but we've got 3 more important topics to talk about before we go. Friday, we've got Judy Bell Barker from Wolverhampton Council, and she's going to be looking at quality post-Grenfell, post-Hackett, and particularly from a local authority perspective. Then next Tuesday, a week today, we've got Martin Taylor from LABC, and he's going to be looking at the Building Safety Bill, which I think, Anne, came out yesterday, wasn't it?
It did, yes. Yeah.
Yesterday. So we're taking a look at that a week today. And then on Friday week, we've got Rob Rob Farrow from T. Clark, and he's going to be giving us a case study on the Nightingale hospitals. So I think you'll agree that will be a good finale to our webinar sessions, which started in mid-March and have now gone on right through to the end of July. We're doing a lot more, Anne, than we ever thought we would, to be honest.
No, it's amazing.
I know. They've proved very popular with our members and supporters. So we're going to take August off, and then we're going to be back in September with another range of webinars where we're going to be concentrating on pipeline, because I think people's attention has turned to actually where's the next job coming from. So we've got speakers lined up from Hinkley Point, HS2, Birmingham Council going to come and talk about the Commonwealth Games and so on. So hopefully something for interest. And at the end of each month in September, we're going to have a panel of experts looking at what we might call the state of the nation on a monthly basis. So hopefully something of interest and value to our members and supporters. But for now, Anne, thank you to you. Thank you once again to Howard and John, and to everyone else that joined us. I wish you all a good afternoon and a very successful rest of the week.
Just before you go, Andrew.
Yes.
Don't forget that on Thursday, we're co-partnering with Construction Week on a webinar,
I beg your pardon.
which is at 3 o'clock. It's on the net zero policy, a journey to clean heat. That is at 3 o'clock. Okay.
Thank you very much, Howard. And thank you to all, and have a good afternoon.
You too. No,
Thank
thank
you
you for inviting me.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.